Good afternoon and welcome. As Craig said, this panel is on the largest subgenre within speculative fiction, and that is military science fiction. We have a lot of readers in this genre. It sometimes gets a little bit of a short shrift from some of the other genres. It's not considered serious enough, with exceptions like Scalzi's Old Man's War doesn't get as much critical acclaim. And when one of our stories finally became a Nebula finalist, the bloggers and the reviewers who go through all that list expressed shock that a military science fiction story actually made it in. And they went so far as expressing that military science fiction should not be eligible. However, the U.S. government seems to think different. Ronald Reagan's strategic initiative was large. SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, was largely based on Jerry Pournelle's Citizens Advisory Council for National Space Policy. In 2015, the United States Marine Corps brought in 17 military science fiction writers for a weekend at Quantico, where they were to write stories to bring life to their futures assessment. And last year, the U.S. Army initiated the first of its Mad Scientist Science Fiction Writers Contest, where the writers were supposed to look at Army tactics and strategy from 2030 to 2050. So we have a lot of readers, we have a lot of books, and at least the government thinks we're important. And right here, we have a panel, an august panel of some of the best writers within the field. So I'd like to start off, if we can start off with Michael, if you could just, you probably know everybody, but just for those that don't, introduce yourself, tell a bit about what you write.
So I'm Michael Cooper. I write in what's called the Aeon 14 universe, which is what I prefer to call like a future history of humanity. And of course that involves war. So there's military science fiction in there. I have about 60 books right now, and I would say probably about 30 or 40 of them fall pretty squarely into military science fiction.
I'm Chris Kennedy, former naval aviator. That's my bona fide to the mil sci-fi genre. Now both the author and publisher for the Four Horsemen universe, which is mercenary warfare in a mecha environment. We have put out 24 books in the last 23 months, so we're cranking.
Hey, this is my first panel ever, and God, these lights are bright. Yeah. Craig Alanson. I write the Expeditionary Force series about basically a barrel of monkeys and a talking beer can.
Hi, I'm Richard Fox. You may know me from such events as 10 minutes ago. And, I write military science fiction. It started with the Ember War saga, which I touched on briefly. And I won the 2017 Dragon Award for Best Military Science Fiction Novel. But thank you. Much to my surprise, and the consternation of other people who were there. So I was in the United States Army for 10 years, deployed to Iraq twice. Each one of those was a 15-month fun jaunt in the desert. And I was an artillery officer, then an intelligence officer. And then I got really smart and got out.
I'm Jay Allan. I have about 40 books. I'd say most of them probably could claim to be military science fiction. Apparently enough of them slip over the line into space opera that Craig put me on that panel yesterday too. But in any event, some of you are probably here for that. So hopefully we'll have some interesting things to say here.
And I'm Jonathan Brazee. I'm a retired Marine infantry colonel. I've got 66 titles right now, most being military sci-fi. I didn't win a Dragon Award, but I was nominated I was a finalist for one. I was a finalist for a Nebula Award. I'm also
some guy named Weber got him. Weber and Zahn, you know.
Yeah, who were they? I'm also the chair for SFWA, the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America Education. But you're not here to listen to me. We're here to listen to our panelists. So right now, I'd like to say, if you look throughout the genres of speculative fiction, there's a lot of military in it. There's space opera tends to have military, alien contact, all that. A lot of the genres have military members or military units. So what, in your opinion, what's the definition of military science fiction, and how does that differ for some of the other genres which may have military members in it? And we'll start here on this side this time, Jay.
Well, I kind of think military science fiction sort of divides into two definitions, and different people are going to feel differently. I think there's a very, very literal definition where it's specifically military unit involved, and that's the main character or characters. And then there's a wider description where the conflict is the main part of the story, but it's maybe not as intensely a military, focus. I kind of like the wider definition, but I think the military sci-fi, all these genres everybody's got a slightly different idea what they are. I would say the thing that surprised me most about military science fiction when I started writing it was a lot bigger than I thought it was. Far more readers out there than I expected. So just going with what Jonathan said about being ignored or not being ignored, it's actually a pretty large genre, I think, and a lot of stuff to read.
As far as what I would consider military science fiction is that if you have your science fiction, you have your military involved, and you have a military problem. If you look at Honor Harrington, it's not just the fleets shooting any giant missiles at each other over long distances. You also have a lot of the politics involved and the larger scope, and that will almost push Honor Harrington into a further space opera kind of genre to it. Now, if you look at a book where the problem is the bugs are coming to eat us and we have to go shoot them in the face right now, you have the Armor book by John Steakley, you wouldn't give that a space opera kind of feel to it. Rather, it's that Felix in the armor doing the military tactics to defeat the bugs. Politics, not so much. So when I think of military science fiction, I think there's a military problem solved with military means, which normally means shooting it in the face.
Yeah, I think military science fiction is about the military experience of the characters. They're in a military situation within an organized military unit with a common set of tactics and rules of engagement that defines their actions. And like you look at Star Wars. Star Wars has Imperial soldiers and Rebel soldiers, but the focus is not on their military experience. The focus is on space wizards whacking each other with sticks. So it's not, Star Wars is not military sci-fi, right?
Glowing sticks.
Yeah, it's definitely the military experience, both of the characters solving the military problem. In our universe, it's all about the mercenary, so it's definitely all military all the time.
I don't really have anything to add to this. It's just what these guys said.
That's the first time I haven't heard you go on. Okay. Okay, since we now have a feeling of what military science fiction is, what makes for good military science fiction? Versus, is it the tactics? Is it the character building? Is it realism? Does it relate to the military of today? Michael?
It's Sergeant Apone from Aliens when the colonial Marines are going past. He's like, badasses. That's what people want. That was really loud. I apologize for that. Hopefully it wasn't as loud up there. But that's what you want. Like, you want like the down and dirty. You want these characters and the situations that they're in and how they as people are dealing with what they're in. Because no matter what we read in any genre, we care about people. We care about robots punching people in the face when it's Richard stuff. But otherwise, we care about people. And that's where the stories are. That's how we relate. And I always, when I talk to people about anything they're doing with their stories, I said people relate to people. And so no matter what you do, you have to be about those characters. And I think that's what we want. We want to see, like, okay, given the structure, these terrible situations that these people are in, how are they still human? How do they still act and behave in ways that I can relate to and be entertained by? I think that's a really big thing. Some people do read fiction to be, to punish themselves in some fashion, but most of the time we want to get away from it. We want to read entertaining stories, like the colonial Marines and aliens probably didn't behave like any force might actually behave and survive. Well, I guess they didn't survive, so maybe that's exactly how it works. But we were tremendously entertained by them, and you were entertained by Bill Paxton's character screaming they're all going to die, and stuff like that. And then put her in charge. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we want that stuff. So yeah, we want aliens, basically. I think what it comes down to. There's my answer.
And I'm going to add to that just a little bit. You asked about the technology and having authentic military stuff, and yeah, that's all great, but that's all ancillary to the character. We want to see the people. You can lose people by having bad technology or bad military things when you have, the guy right out of leadership school taking charge of the entire ship and running it around the universe. People look at that and go, no, that's not it. So you can ruin something with bad military, but it's all about the person.
Did I do that? I did not. Yeah, I think what makes a good military sci-fi story is what makes a good story. It's relatable characters, exciting action, and a plot that makes you want to say, what happens next, right?
It's 100% violent agreement with him, and I would also add that if it comes to military sci-fi, you've got that neat aspect of Gauss rifles, of power armor, of that kind of alien threat you're just not going to find on Earth. If you give someone space mash, it's not as exciting. But also when it comes to military sci-fi, one aspect that you don't get in a lot of other fiction is you've got that group of soldiers, Marines, Navy, etc., and they're all under pressure at the same time. They're all working towards that goal, and some of them will screw up along the way. But for those of us who served in the military, you kind of get that quick esprit de corps of we are all giant shit sandwich. We've all got to take a bite here. We all got to get through this. And military sci-fi, you can get that kind of an aspect that you won't get in Regency romance. Just from that acting.
I will add another vote on the character element. I think that is one area where sometimes military sci-fi goes a little off the rails. I mean, you really do need to care about the character. I like to say make the people care about the character before you kill him. But I do think that is something important, character development. What is this guy other than just somebody holding a rifle or fighting? That's an important thing. The other thing, particularly since most of us write series, I think you can have a single book like Alien or movie, obviously, but I mean, where you're really just focused on an incident and you don't know too much about the world around them. But I do think you do need a little world building when you get into a series. Why are these people fighting? And where are they from? And I think that's important. I think sometimes that doesn't get done as well as it should be also.
And I think one other thing is that for many people, there are a lot of people that wanted to join the military but couldn't for one reason or another. Yeah, and this lets them experience the being in a military unit and being part of a band of brothers or a band of sisters, and getting to see and do and be part of that, where through some other quirk of fate they just weren't able to. So it is very much an experiential kind of thing where you get to go places and do things that you wouldn't get to do otherwise.
How many people out here have either written military sci-fi or want to? Pretty much the whole room. And I was going to ask a different question, but since, Chris, you kind of led me into this one. If someone has never served, first of all, can they write effective military sci-fi? See, Greg Allan nodding his head. And if so, what are some ways that they can get the sense of verisimilitude or realism? And since you led me into it, I'm starting with you.
Awesome. Well, that David Weber guy who was previously mentioned, he wasn't in the military and he kind of does it all right. And I would say absolutely, you can write it without having to be in the military. About half of the authors that write in my universe were not in the military. It's all a matter of doing your homework, talking to people that were in the military, finding out what their experiences were like and how things worked. And then once you've got the story written, run it by some people so that you can see, that's the way it is. Yeah, that's really cool. Or, ooh, see, no, that's not the way it works at all.
Yeah, I planned to go to the Air Force and took the test and they said you're colorblind, which my wife could tell you. But I figured that J.K. Rowling's not a wizard, right? Michael Anderle's not a vampire, although I've never seen him outside in daylight. Okay? But it is, I have a lot of veteran friends. I worked in military contracting all my life. Always worked around military, active duty and veterans. I listen to them, empathize with them, and you write fictional characters based on their experiences.
It's one quick thing to point out. I think everyone knows who Tom Clancy is and what he wrote, and he was a real estate agent. He never served, but he had a library card, so and he was able to make that happen. Now, as far as I've served, and so I kind of get like a head start. But for anyone who's not served, just read a lot in the books that people like, and you'll pick up the tropes. and you'll pick up what people need to know. And like, I was an artillery officer, and if I put in what happened in a fire direction center into a book, it would be nothing but acronyms for several pages with the occasional boom in the distance. It would be an awful read. So, that's not what you want to put in there. You don't want to put the absolute realism. You just need to get those feelings and that excitement that people want from the story. And if you read a lot and you understand, the tropes, you're good to go.
Yeah, I think these guys pretty much, said it. I agree. Obviously, there are a lot of things. The wizard example is a good one. People write things that they aren't. I just think you need to pay attention to anything that you're going to do, understand it so that you can do a good job with it, and really that's what's necessary.
So I think something.
We have two of these.
Yeah, it's very fun. I know that Chris, you talked about the esprit de corps that you have in the military, and I think a lot of folks have worked in companies, maybe not in the military. We have the same sort of thing. Maybe work at a Walmart, and your boss sucks, and the stock. I don't know what sort of jobs are at Walmart. But some of the people like stock shelves and stuff like that, and they kind of band together, and they kind of they do stuff to stick it to the man, while still getting their job done. They hate it when they get stupid orders that tell them to do dumb shit that makes their job harder. That happens in the military too. It's just another, in many respects, it's like another job. And so you have people you've worked with that you get that same sort of band of brothers. Like no one's shooting at you, so it's a little bit different as far as the penalty for failure scenario. But you can draw on that sort of thing for like I had things when I worked in software development where I was given 2 weeks to build a back-end system for Obama's White House because I'm a Canadian and I couldn't touch it once it went live. But I did actually have to do the FBI interviews for everybody else. I had to help the FBI, snitch on any of my friends or anything like that might have done bad things. So and I worked with this team of guys and we got it done. And we had a serious amount of camaraderie that we got out of doing that project. And we did another one. We had to change. We had to get ready for the Grammys. On the site the sites we were hosting, and we had to spin up 136 edge caching servers and figure out how to make them synchronize properly and stuff like that. And we worked on it for like a week without sleep practically. And we and those experiences made us bond together and made us stronger. And so that little shit couldn't get to us. And that's the sort of thing that happens a lot in the military, especially if you get shot at, I imagine. That you sort of you got these guys back, and the fact the guy that puts his toothpaste, puts a cap on backwards, is you don't give a shit about that sort of thing anymore, or maybe we drive you nuts otherwise. So another thing I really recommend from the research, there are really good shows out there, and I always joke about this, but I think before I started writing military science fiction, I watched Black Hawk Down 65 times because I felt like that show was. I talked to friends that show's really good just to show you how much in the shit it is to be out there. And I also, as a younger person, I played way too much Counter-Strike, and I learned in Counter-Strike that a couple of things. If you try to hide, someone with an AWP finds you and shoots you. Everybody dies in 5 minutes, and you never find out where you get shot from. And if you run really fast toward the target, you also die. Which is one of the reasons why I did not enlist in the military, because I'm like, it sounds like a great way to die. So I'm like, I was Canadian actually. In Canada, you have to have really good grades. I didn't have good grades, so that's my real story.
Okay. Now that's the Michael I know.
Yes, I can, Chris Fox. Here's your money.
Okay.
So in terms of listening to veterans, I've had one guy. I put a joke in the book. He said we had an opportunity one day, and the commanding officer said we have a bonus opportunity. He said, "Ah, sir, is bonus one word or two?"
Okay, we've talked a little bit about what makes a good book. So I'm going to ask you, if you could point out one book that has influenced your writing, and I know some people you talked about a Black Hawk Down. Okay, that's a movie. If you want to do a movie, that's okay. What have you read or watched that has influenced you in your writing? And you got Craig. You got the mic.
Well, every book I've read has influenced me, good or bad, right? The book that really kind of inspired me was The Forever War by John, fantastic. Starship Troopers, Hammer Slammers, all books I read when I was growing up, formative experiences. That's really, the most recent one that really kind of inspired me was Old Man's War. Just love that book, yeah.
Definitely Hammer Slammers growing up was a big one. I really like that, and normally I'm not a huge short story person, and a lot of those are, but I really got into them. I would say that the one that probably was one of the most life-changing for me was Hymn Before Battle John Ringo and the whole Aldonada series. That really got me where I was, wow, this is really cool. I want to do this. I want to be part of this. And a lot of Ringo's stuff is really kind of the way I write. Who you are as an author is a sum total of who you read. So I'm kind of a Ringo, Weber, Correa sort of person.
That makes me Anne McCaffrey. Anne McCaffrey tricked me into reading romance, and then she teamed up with Elizabeth Moon, who suddenly got me into reading military science fiction. Elizabeth Moon and Anne McCaffrey wrote a book called Sassenach, and that was my first real exposure to military science fiction. I really fell in love with it. I fell in love with like the naval aspects and just even like just reading about things like officer country. What is that on a starship? Like what does that mean? I started researching it, really getting into it, and I read a lot of that, a lot of Elizabeth Moon, a lot of Weber. And then I encountered a series called Starfist, written by Dave Sherman and Craig something. I actually had it on my phone, so I wouldn't forget his name. But anyway, Starfist, and that was the first one I really read that was, aside from Starship Troopers, that was just ground pounders. It was just guys like, here's your objective, here's a company of you guys, you're deployed here, and I learned a lot from reading those. Those guys are really good at telling a story about characters, but making sure, like, I understood what Q Company was, I understood, like, okay, the Marines come in over water, stuff like that. Even when they're coming in from space, they would come in over water, because they have these traditions that mean things to them. And that was really good for learning a lot about that. So I think that was, strangely enough, it's like something that no one knows, Starfist, but it's hugely formative for me.
I would say that I've read Starship Troopers more than any other book out there, but one book that's really influenced my writing is the Eisenhorn trilogy by a British author by the name of Dan Abnett. And if you've not picked it up, it's wonderful. And the story, it starts with this character who's quite pure, quite the good guy, and it arcs downward. And it arcs downward so subtly, you don't even realize how far down that this character has gone. And at the end of the third book, Eisenhorn does this horrible thing, absolutely horrific thing. And like you're reading, yeah, you should have done that to him. And you just get it, and you keep going. And then after I finished that third book, I was like, did he just turn his best? I won't spoil it. But did he just do that absolutely horrible thing? He did. And I realized that Dan Abnett had got me so close to this character that I was on that same arc of going down into doing these horrible things with him. And I was, yeah. And then I thought, wow, I could do that to people who read my stuff. I could take them on that same kind of journey. They get to that end, and they're like, hey, why shouldn't like that guy? He's bad. But then they kind of, your readers, they appreciate that.
I'll throw another vote in for the Forever War in one sense that not usually discussed about it. Obviously, that book is very famous and for a lot of reasons, but I just remember reading it when I was younger, and it very much put me in the action. I just felt the way it was written and the style of the writing. So when I'm looking for a book that's affected the way I write, I would say that the style that was written in has affected me a lot and probably contributed a lot to the way I write books today. And as far as another series, it's definitely military science fiction, but it's very different than normal military science fiction. David Drake, S.M. Sterling did a series called the General Series, and I just thought it was really an interesting idea. It's like a post-galactic empire fall, and some old AI is still functioning, and it's pulling the strings to try to bring civilization back up on technology level. And it's all about really the military characters that do this. And I thought it was a really interesting idea, and it sort of made me try to expand my point of view. And maybe not every story is just going to be 10 Marines stuck on an alien planet trying to get back home or something like that. So,
as I said before, not everybody is in love with military science fiction, and one of the criticisms that is is often leveled at it is that it's war porn, it's military porn, and there's a lot of death and destruction, and it cheapens death. I don't happen to believe that, but I'd like to ask the panel, how do you think, first of all, is that a valid criticism? And secondly, how do you handle death whether it's the red shirt, the spear carrier, or a main character? How do you handle death? Jay, why don't we start with you?
Well, anybody who's read my stuff knows most of it's pretty grim most of the time. I do think you probably could cheapen death in certain things depending on the way you handle things. I'll say for myself, my characters usually go through hell before usually they win in the end, because that's what we just want. Nobody wants to be depressed constantly, but I put them through hell, and I definitely show the cost. And I also do kill main characters sometimes. I'm not Game of Thrones crazy with it, but I mean, I think if you want to have some suspense, you want to have people really worrying about a character that they care about, you got to at least have them believe, he might do it. I mean, so I think that's an important thing. But I do think if you don't show the cost of these things and the suffering that goes into some of this, I do think you could risk doing that. I don't think the better authors in the genre do, but I think it's a pitfall that you could fall into.
It's from the military's perspective, is that death in the military, it is earth-shattering for everyone around you. And I remember we were in Iraq, going on an operation, I heard one of my friends, they got hit. And on the radio, they don't say how bad, because they don't want you to get on the phone, like, you call his mom before someone else can go. And, for a couple of days, it's just like, where is he? Like, how bad was he? And then one day, Humvee pulls up, he pops out. I was like, I thought you were dead. He was like, why? No, I just got a little shrapnel on my arm. It's nothing. I was like, you made me worry. And so, so within the military, death and injury of your comrades, this is a huge deal. It's never, unless it's just never that way with the people who you serve with. Now, if you're going to kill a character, good news, writers, you got the opportunity to kick your readers in the emotional jimmy. All right. So if you're going to do that, you put your freaking steel-toed boot on. All right. If you're going to make that death happen, make it matter. Like, I have one character from the Ember War. His name is Elias. Fan favorite character. He should have had his own spin-off series. Everyone loved him. But I got to the end of book 9, and I realized, okay, he's going to have to die. Oops, shit, sorry. Spoiler. Yeah, all right. He's going to have to die here. And then I'm like, I should just use space magic and get him out and keep him going. But then, I could kind of feel Elias staring at me through the screen. He's like, you're not going to do that. I'm like, I'm not sorry, sir. I'm not going to do that. And it was just, but you know what? When the way he went, it ended up being this excellent starting point for the next series. And like how he died was it became this mythos that surrounded these other characters. So it really, not cheapening the death of, space magic, he's safe. It served the story very well, and it really led into something else. So if you're going to kill someone, kill the heck out of them, and make sure your reader gets a little, Old Yeller kind of moment to it.
Yeah, I agree. If you're going to kill a character off, you do it in military sci-fi because this person was willing to risk their life for others. And you show the emotional impact on the survivors. If you are using a death to thrill someone, that's not military sci-fi, it's horror. Right? That is death porn right there.
Yeah, Patton in World War II said that the object of war wasn't to die for your country, but to make the other poor dumb bastard die for his. As the author, you're kind of the general, and you want to spend your lives carefully. You don't want to make it death porn. If you're getting rid of everybody quickly, it loses the readers. You want to make that connection to the character, and if they have to go, they've got to do it in a way that really hits you in the emotional jimmy.
I think I wonder this is part of what you're getting at, John, is that what about like all the bad guys that get mowed down? Like they're just like a bunch of sticks laying out there. I think some people look at that and they think like, okay, the main characters are all fine, and like anybody we know, the platoon is okay, but they just killed 700 people. It's like, if you watch Last Action Hero, Arnold Schwarzenegger's like, well, in the last movie we only killed 119 people, and some sort of thing. And that's something we have to be careful about. And I actually have my characters sometimes they care about where they're shooting people. Like if they're in a conflict, because these are they're all augmented. They're basically all T-1000s in my story at this point. And if they can shoot someone in the arm, they'll shoot them in the arm because they're capable of doing that. They don't always try and blow everybody's head off all the time. And I do write stuff where they actually run search and rescue operations on the enemy ships after they've won a battle, because I want to show that they're still human. Because otherwise I'd be writing monsters. I don't want my main characters to be monsters. And they take prisoners, and they have to talk to these prisoners about but they want to get intel, and the guy's like, you just killed everybody I know, so I'm not giving you any intel. And I get to the emotional aspects of that sort of thing. And I write really big space, so I love doing math. And so I worked out the rate at which people could build starships, and people would have fleets in the millions. And so what happens when you defeat a fleet with 1 million ships? How many POWs do you have? Where do you put them? How do you deal with all that stuff? And what sort of tools? The guy of one of my starships flies around with a brig that can hold 46,000 people, because they have to deal with the fact that they might actually take that many prisoners, and they don't want to just space them all. So I try to show that there's not. It's 36. Well, right. I love the math. I know exactly how big it is. But yeah, so That's what I try to do to balance it out.
We're getting a little bit short on time. I'd like to jump to one last question, but keep it a little bit short so we have a chance for some questions. If you had one piece of advice to give someone looking to write something into military science fiction, what would it be? Michael, you've got the mic in your hand.
Make friends with people that have served.
That's a good one.
Or if you have served, make better friends with people that served. I don't know.
Well, even if you have served, make friends with people from the other different services so that, okay, I flew Navy airplanes. I can do that. But that doesn't make me the expert at being a ground pounder or assaulting things, other than from the air. So develop a good cadre of people that you can reach out to and touch. And it doesn't have to be just military. There are a lot of other people, that have skills and things that are military related. Anybody that, might be involved in construction and has blown things up might be very helpful to have when you're starting to take down buildings and things.
If you're asking for advice for people who are starting to write military science fiction,
Whatever you think.
yeah, make it different. Because there's a million of the books out there, and unless you're, different from these guys and me, why should they read your book when it pops up on Amazon? Make it different.
I would encourage you all to learn how to pace out your battles. Like learn the pacing of how, okay, you got the starfighters over here, you got the guys on the ground fighting over here, and and then okay, these two characters get into a fist to fist. They whip out the knives and go at each other. Learn how to make that flow better, and it is tough. Okay, it is a lot of times what happens in military science fiction books. You get what's called the fourth reel of a Star Wars movie. Okay, think back to Jedi, where you got Darth Vader and Luke are going at it. You got the battle on Endor, and then you got the starfighters going through the Death Star. Okay, a lot of times you could end up writing that, and it's hard. Okay, so work on the pacing through the battles, and if you can do that, people who read military science fiction who really like fighting, they're going to appreciate that you nailed that, and then also nail characters because you can't just have fighting.
I would also say, especially if you want to create a universe instead of one book and something you'd like to continue with, is give a little bit of thought to the world building. It's important to show the camaraderie between the characters that are fighting each other, but you need to make them real people, so they need backgrounds, and you got to at least be ready to address the question why they're there fighting and give it some kind of meaning. I mean, you can do one book or a short story on the guys trying to get back to the dropship and they're surrounded. But sooner or later, you're going to have to, if you want readers to really latch onto those characters and that storyline and be anxious for the next book, you've got to start giving them some information on why those people are there, how they came to be there, why they're fighting. And I think that's an important part that sometimes people forget.
Okay, thank you. We've got about 6 minutes left, so if you have any questions, please walk on up to the mic. You go ahead.
I have two questions. What are your favorite tropes within this genre? And the second question is, if you were a female writing in this genre, would you use a different pen name because you are a female writing in this genre?
Yes. Let's put it this way, it's mostly, middle-aged or young white guys reading it, right? So, yeah, use, N.K. Jemisin or J.K. Rowling or something like that.
My favorite trope is the smartass. And the one guy who's there to, military science fiction, they're here to eat your face, and then the one guy who's freaking out about having his face eaten. One, it tends to really alleviate the tension, otherwise your stories can be way too dark and gritty. So if you've got that one smartass who will cut the occasional joke to alleviate the tension, that's really helpful. And as far as a pen name, I think, the double, the initials, people would just glance right on past that. But there are a number of women who write actually military sci-fi. And Elizabeth Moon, and there's one woman who writes 501st stories for Star Wars, whose name I can't remember. I don't think my readers. I don't think anyone would ever say like, "We're just glad to dude writing it." They never get like that. So.
Yeah, on the pen name, I have to agree. The initials are fine, but I would. It's not ideal. But when you think about when people are looking at a book and what goes through their mind consciously and subconsciously, the cover, the description, all the stupid little things that whether they click buy to try it or they don't, you want to give yourself every advantage. And it is an overwhelmingly male readership, I think. So I would probably do that. Either a pen name or just use initials. Tropes, the only thing with tropes, the problem is, I think when you use them, whether you like them or not, is try to make them a little different, because otherwise it's just something somebody's seen 50,000 times. I kind of like the reluctant hero myself, sort of dragged into the situation and maybe is a little disinterested at first or something like that. But again, like anything, try to make it unique to your character. Don't try to make it a copy of something that you read 50 times, because that just won't work so well.
I deliberately used initials because I want people to think that I might be a woman. Because I write female protagonists, so I wanted to make it so that a lot of women would look at it and think maybe this is a woman writing this, and I'd get more of an audience that way, actually.
And I would say there are a lot of great women writing mill sci-fi right now. Casey Azell, who writes in our universe, is one of the best writers I know. Young, up-and-coming Air Force major selected for major. She's awesome. I would say own it. That would be my advice. Own it, because there are a lot of great female writers, Sarah Hoyt, Amy DuBoff, just that are around. And I always like the Master Chief. In whether it's video game, movies, whatever, the first time that you see the Colonial Space Marines in Aliens, what's he doing? He puts the cigar in his mouth, coming out of hypersleep. and he's tough. I mean,
Yes.
You've got some readers who are experts, or at least they think they are. Can any of you admit if someone has come back to you and told you got a technical detail wrong, a mechanical detail wrong? Can any of you admit that, and how do you handle it?
Yeah, I've gotten things wrong. What do? I immediately go to the file, fix it, and re-update it, and hope nobody noticed before that.
Yeah, I kept using the word clip instead of magazine, and I must have got 1,000 emails about that. And then I had my main character say, "I'm an idiot. I kept using the wrong word." So I owned it. Yeah.
It's generally I try to keep as many technical details out, because I just think those trip up the reader, so I don't get those many corrections. But if everyone said, like, I did have somebody say, "You got the wrong magazine side and that gun one time," I'm like, "I'm a failure. I'll go fix it."
Yeah, I mean, I made mistakes too, and been very grateful for the ebook format, because all of a sudden, what mistake? There's no mistake. Yes, it does in print too, but you do the best you can on that. But I also find you get a lot of people who give you corrections that are not really correct. But I try to be as gracious as I can with that. I'm always try to be very courteous to my readers, even when they're a little off. But I do wish sometimes they would take into account the fact that there's a slight difference in a rank that I used or something, and they're not realizing this is 500 years in the future and something might change. I've actually deliberately changed things to try to show that this is not 5 years from now, in the Mideast somewhere. It's 500 years from now on another planet. But people will still come back and try to make those kinds of corrections. But, it's just, I take it to show that they're actually that engaged, that they care enough, and that's a good thing. So.
Okay, we got really quick time for one last question.
Okay, so my question is about gear. I was in the military as well. I read the things they carried, and I noticed the gear has basically not changed since the Vietnam War. And also considering that military people have a very small amount of gear that they can take with them, what is the gear that your characters keep with them that is their touchstone gear, the thing that they can't lose?
So my characters, I've moved a little bit. Most of my stuff takes place between 2,000 and 7,000 years in the future. So when they're going to go into battle, they back up to a rack, and the rack completely armors them. So they actually get a lot of gear with them because it's just built into the armor. But they have these things called light wands, which are kind of like lightsabers, but they're only about this long, and they're actually electron beams with the reflectors on them and a nanofilament. And they're basically like the Marines' K-bar. Like, you'll pry them out of their cold, dead hands. So they've like all got one. And a lot of times they've actually been modified, some of the characters, where they actually are able to slide their light wand hilt into their thigh. So that even if they're not armored or anything, they've still got it with them. So they're completely naked, they've got their light wand on them.
All my guys are in giant mecha suits, so they've got basically everything they need, whether that's weapons or whatnot. I'd say the one thing you want to make sure you have is a good medikit with, your nanobot first aid kit.
Yeah, my characters in the Starship carry pictures of their family and a big jar of marshmallow fluff to make delicious fluff and udders.
A lot of my characters are in a form of power armor, and what generally will set that apart is they have a K-bar blade put into one of the gauntlets. When it comes time to stab someone, they kind of go a little bit Wolverine on them, and it makes for a great visual in your mind. Just like, just like that, with that exact sound effect.
Yeah, I'd say power armor is the big game changer, I think, in most military science fiction. I mean, if you look at history today, or Roman soldier 2,000 years ago, I mean, his kid's limited pretty much by what he can carry, and that changes when you have a nuclear reactor on your back and 10,000 pounds of armor around you. So I think that's a big changer, what you can do with the kit. I also think one thing we do is we try to be realistic, I think, when we can. But I mean, let's be honest, we also want to tell good stories. I mean, I have things like the blades on it's the same kind of thing. We want to see that kind of thing. But in reality, what's a soldier going to be like in 500 years? He's probably going to be a mile underground directing 500 drones on the surface. I mean, that's probably what's going to happen. But that's just not as good a story to tell. So take the realism to a certain point. But you want to keep the drama in there. You want to keep the human. People want to watch human characters interacting. They don't want to watch one guy in a base fighting another guy in a base 100 miles away or 1,000 miles away, and it's all just equipment doing the fighting, which is probably more like what it will be like.
Okay, thank you very much for coming to the panel. Hope you enjoyed it. Let's give our panelists a hand.